Welcome back to Canada Pot Talks on 107.7 Pulse FM. I'm Stephen Feldman. We're talking with Jeff Mascio from Canabis One Holdings. Good morning, Jeff. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, Stephen.
Thanks for coming on, Jeff. You know, we were just talking with Aaron Saltz of Stoic Advisory in terms of the differences in the kind of the Canadian and the U.S. market, what's happening out there in the M&A space, valuations, etc. Maybe tell our listeners briefly, you know, about yourself and about Canabis One.
Well, Canabis One is a Canadian public company trading on the CSE, ticker symbol CBIS. I guess we are considered by the industry a vertically integrated multi-state U.S. operator, and we have operations in Colorado, Nevada, Washington, Oregon, and California currently, where we distribute nearly 300 of our SKUs across 7 different brands in more of a house of brands type of model, similar to that of Constellation Brands in the alcohol space.
Right, and we see a lot. We see a lot about that in the American model, the focus on brands. Maybe you can address that.
Well, yeah. So if you look back in history, every industry is typically defined by the brands that make up that space. And currently in the cannabis space, there really have not been any brands that really define the industry. It's been defined by what will ultimately become a commodity, but the flower itself and the processes to grow flower or extract it. We are now moving into the space where branding and marketing and actual product development moves into what will define the space as the brands in that space, in the cannabis space.
Right, and you have been, you know, from what I read, pretty aggressive in terms of your acquisitions. Maybe you can you just had a deal with Atachi in the U.S. to help you with some deals, Evergreen Organics, Fat Face Farms. It sounds like you've been on a busy spree down there.
Well, we have. So the thought is if we can attract the best talent in the industry and also the best brands that have penetrated their respectable jurisdiction, then bringing them all together under the Canabis One brand will allow us to grow rapidly without having to organically reproduce everything that we've done in Colorado. So we go out and we attract best minds and the best brands to come join us rather than us acquiring and taking over, if you will. So it's working very well because we are having a lot of success in getting most of the acquisition targets through our door and into the Canabis One umbrella and integrated to the culture that we have developed over here over the last 2 years.
Right. Now, do you think, you know, given what's happening in terms of, let's say, the canopy acreage deal, all these various situations, that there is a chase, maybe, a gold rush from maybe the Canadian listed companies to buy U.S. assets and the valuations that maybe come with such demand? Or what are you kind of seeing in terms of that M&A space in terms of valuations and opportunities?
Well, there's definitely a valuation discount in the U.S., certainly because of the legal framework. And you also see that a lot of the capital market, or a lot of the capital is coming through the capital markets in Canada, where the Canadian operators that are receiving a good bit of that capital are now looking to the United States, where the belief will be the primary driver of the industry. So it's not too surprising that we see the more aggressive plays coming out of Canada's capital markets into U.S. operations, because in Canada it's really restricted right now, and then quite frankly you can't even bring our branded products or our anything but flower and distribution into the Canadian market. So they're finding themselves in a difficult position to not be able to grow in their own country. So they're looking to the U.S. So you're seeing a discount with the U.S. operators of about half that valuation to the Canadian operators, so it just makes sense that arbitrage would naturally attract the Canadian capital into the U.S. markets.
Right. And where do you see the market opportunities for Canabis One then? You're operating in numerous U.S. states. What other opportunities are you guys identifying down there in terms of the market opportunities for yourself?
Well, we're definitely focused on the 10 states that have legalized retail cannabis, but we're also looking to areas that are moving legislation forward that looks like they may be moving in the same direction as the previous 10. But what we have found is if we take a slower approach and allow those markets to develop a little bit more fully before we come into those markets, we realize that we're going to be much more successful because we don't have to reinvent the wheel every single state or every single time we move into a new jurisdiction.
Right. It's interesting.
So
I find when you see the U.S. numbers, for example, you see new states that legalize, you see new stores that open. The demand just seems far more significant than I see, for example, what's happening in Canada. What are your thoughts in terms of that? In terms, a lot of these markets, let's say, we did talk briefly about California and the battles that they're going through. But, a lot of these markets, Jeff, would you say that they don't quite had an established, let's say, a cannabis culture or black market that was substantially supplying things? And you have a lot of very curious and eager consumers out there looking for these legal avenues.
Without a doubt, and definitely in Colorado and Washington, you've seen the more of the abolishment of the gray and black markets. But in California, probably because of the high taxes and the lack of regulatory oversight, California is equally as, I would say, probably still 50-50 gray market to legal markets, and that makes it a huge challenge for us when we try to expand and acquire in those markets, because you're competing with these brands that are true brands but are not even licensed in any way.
Right. Now, what kind of, we look at certainly the diversity of American products. What kind of products then does Canabis One supply in your markets?
So we have products across the entire spectrum of what can be created out of the cannabis plant. So anything from topicals to bath salts to edibles, chocolate baked goods, and vaporizers. So and also concentrates and flour. So we are fully very vertically integrated with all of the products that the cannabis space has to offer.
Right. Now, when for the listener maybe not as keen, the vertical integration you talk about is in terms of you are growing the product, you're processing it, you're branding. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that.
So we have cultivation operations to supply the flour that we use, and then in the extraction, and then we move it to extraction, and then after the extraction, we take the cannabinoids that have been extracted out of the cannabis plant and use them as ingredients in the various products that we have out in the retail marketplace.
Right. Now, look, it sounds like you have your hands full, certainly in the States. Are there any global opportunities, anything, as, again, we were discussing with Aaron in terms of a lot of the directions some people are going or are looking worldwide, EU, South America, et cetera. Any thoughts on that for Canabis One?
Yes, Canabis One is definitely looking to the global market and how do we position ourselves and continue to take advantage of our lead in the industry. And having been in the industry for so long, we're first to move into areas like Canada where the market is still a little bit challenging and we can't quite begin distributing our brands into Canada, but we are making moves to position ourselves in a way that when that does happen, we have the inroads. And that's just a natural fit being a Canadian public company. But we're also in having conversations that are moving forward to the point where we see a high level of interest from Mexico and also overseas in European zones.
Right.
But
go on.
The world is now kind of reaching out to even the U.S., even though the U.S. still has a framework of legality that doesn't even allow us to expand. We are constantly being prospected, I guess, and requesting or getting requests for help throughout the world.
Right. And it's interesting because, there is, we talked about this many times, the world is interested, the world is watching because a lot of other jurisdictions see the tax revenues and certainly a lot of the benefits, the jobs that's being created in terms of legalizing this product. Jeff, we appreciate you being on this morning. Canabis One Holdings, you can find Canabis